My father, I would say, would fall in that sort of middle area. Fairly well landed, engaged in business, owns an iron forge. Was not the most profitable of individuals. So he struggled with the financial aspect of it. So I was born into that world. But then my world changed around the age of 11. Anyone here 11 years old? Anyone ever been 11 years old? So yes, 11 years old, around your age, at your age, my father died. Now with his death, my world changed in an instant because the one who would guide me through life and support me as a patron, fancy word for saying guide me through life, had been removed. So when he dies, his property is split up between my older half brothers, who were from his first wife, Lawrence and Austin. Part of the law in Virginia, part of the British system, is that almost all of the property tends to go to the eldest son. If there are no sons, for the eldest daughter. So it's called the law of primogeniture. It's Latin, I don't know what it means. I have no education past basic grammar school, so French would have been very helpful to know 20 years ago. That death changed my circumstances, and I found myself living at the bottom of that upper tier. Money was tight for my mother, food was at times tight for my family. I would not say we were as poor as many people were, but compared to what we were used to living with, very different circumstances. My mother also did something very, very unusual for this time. She had myself and 4 younger siblings, all under the age of 11 when my father died. And she, unlike most ladies or women of quality, chose not to remarry. Which is incredibly rare for someone with young children at this time to not remarry. Especially because she now had no natural-born assistant, no patron to guide her children through life. So that meant that I would have to find other avenues of patronage to assist in that growth. Because as someone born to privilege, as a gentleman, society in Virginia placed certain expectations upon me. Expectation means things that I would have to do because of who I was born to be, or expected to be. Now, because I had older half-brothers, I would not be expected to carry the family name forward, because that would be their job. More than likely, they would serve in government. More than likely, I would not. However, the problem is, I was the eldest son of my mother's children. So I had the expectations of leading her half of the family, minus any of the financial ability to do so. And a mother who really, really wanted me to do a good job. Really wanted me to do a good job. So this is the circumstance in which I was born. Now, I could talk endlessly on this subject, it will bore you to death. I will move forward a bit in time. But that helps you understand the world that I came from. I was born in a way and grew up in my young days in a way that my childhood ended very early. By the time I was 12, my education was over. No more reading, no more writing, no more learning of foreign languages, no more basic things that many gentlemen of my age that I could list you a long list of names. You could probably call them out and I would say highly educated. No college or university for me. I was going to have to find a way in life forward without those other trappings placed around it. Not an easy thing to do, even with the position of the world that I was born in. So, my path was fairly clear. I only had a few ways to grow and bring recognition to myself, and by doing so, my family, because it was my obligation to ensure that my family had its name elevated. One of them was immediately dismissed out of hand, the clergy. Nope. The other avenue, the military. What better way for the second or third son of a family to connect himself, to bring glory to his and his family's name, and to elevate himself in society, and also make fairly decent money on the side, than by serving His Majesty's Armed Forces? There's a large problem with that, however. There are no British regiments stationed in Virginia. There's an independent company in the Carolinas, there's 2 there, there's 1 in New York, but that's a whole other circumstance. So there had to be something that would bring potential for military service to me. So my mother and my brother, my half-brother Lawrence, set upon a plan that I would, and the Fairfaxes, who were friends of ours through marriage, would send me off to the Navy. It worked in theory for about 2.5 weeks. Until my mother got a letter from her brother in England who said, this is a terrible idea. For 2 reasons. One, I'm not privileged enough to be able to purchase commissions to rise in rank as time goes on. So if I join as a midshipman, I will stay probably as a midshipman for the majority of my lifetime. And there'll be no potential for advancement. Second, if I decide not to join the British Navy, but instead join the British merchant navies of sorts, I have a very high likelihood of being taken by a British ship, pressed into service, and being a jack tar before the mast for the rest of my life, and dying by the time I was 23 years old. Neither of them sounded like a great idea at the time. So my mother removed her support for this, and the Navy went up in smoke. It worked out fairly well, though I get horribly seasick. So the next thing that came, the next opportunity, was to serve in my brother's stead. So my brother Lawrence, my elder brother Lawrence, guided me, assisted me. He's a complicated man. He loved me well, except when he didn't. Very harsh, very deterministic, very well driven, very connected to society, cared for me, but if you crossed him, did not go well. For example, when my mother removed her support to go join the Navy, Lawrence enacted a part of my father's will that let him sell off the better portion of the property that my mother and I were living upon out from underneath her. That's the kind of man Lawrence is. Now again, supported, kind, present. Again, unless you did a thing that he did not think was the right thing to do. So he had served against the Spanish at Cartagena years earlier, the details of which don't matter very much. One of the few survivors from that conflict from the colonies. He had become an adjutant general of the Northern District, which is a militia position, effectively a glorified secretary, organizing the militia. And because of his illness at the time, he had consumption. When he died, I hoped to potentially petition for and obtain his militia position that would give me some training and understanding of how to operate logistically this responsibility, and then potentially position me for connection other places. So when he died, I petitioned for this Northern District. I didn't get it. I got the Southern District instead, which was hundreds of miles away from where I lived. Yay. And eventually I was given both districts because no one else wanted the Northern District at all. The fellow who got it had moved to Maryland, and they thought, well, you moved to Maryland, so you're not really a Virginian any longer, so you can't have this. He said, but I live just right across the river. No, it doesn't matter. You're in Maryland now. You're dead to us. Bringing up another very important point that you will see between now and the end of the afternoon, if you come back and hear me at 2:15. The colonies, we don't get along at all. We've been in open war with each other before. People don't realize this, but Pennsylvania and Maryland have fought. Pennsylvania and Virginia in 1775 were about, well, in 1755 were about to fight, and then again 20 years later, Massachusetts and New York have fought each other. Right now there's conflict over Vermont, whether New Hampshire or New York. You ever heard of Fort Ticonderoga before?
Yep.
I will take a brief detour I need to highlight to you just how little the colonies like each other. Fort Ticonderoga was taken in 1775 by a group called, you know? The Green Mountain Boys. The Green Mountain Boys were a group of individuals from New England who had settled in Vermont and claiming it for some mostly New Hampshire, some from Connecticut. New York claims Vermont. The Green Mountain Boys took Fort Ticonderoga from the British so they could have a location to launch raids into New York to keep them from moving into Vermont. They were a gang, basically. I cannot emphasize enough. There are open conflict between colonies at various times. They do not, we do not, we do not, we still don't, no, we never get along.
They're like siblings.
That's being nice to siblings. Yeah, it's not a bad association, but worse. But way worse. Way worse. Because some of them wish death upon the others, and actually would enact it, which is not always where siblings are. Hopefully not, if you're God. Anyway, moving on. This tension that existed brought this position to me. So I became an adjutant, and what would have it? A war just happened to break out. Don't ask me how it started.
You're gonna have a long wait.
I'll tell you. I started it. It's true. I fired the first shot in the conflict. It was more complex than that. The short version is in the backcountry of Pennsylvania, Virginia was caught up in a conflict between Great Britain and France over who controlled the Ohio Valley, which we're actually fairly close to. You all know the Ohio Valley.
Yeah.
In those days, York was barely the front, was effectively the frontier. If you look at that sign back behind us, it says the colonial courthouse was built in what year?
1754.
1754, which tells you this is very much frontier in those days. So anything west of here, past the Laurel Highlands, up over down towards where Pittsburgh is, Fort Pitt, that was all effectively disputed territory between France and England and the Haudenosaunee, their name, Iroquois Confederacy, as well as the other native nations who actually lived there. The Delaware, the Shawnee, the Mingo, Seneca, Miami. How much time do you have? There's many nations who live in that small region. England wants it, France wants it, we want it, so we can't let France have it. France wants it, so we can't have it. The folks who actually live there are saying, we live here, excuse us. Complicated business. So this tension had been brewing for quite some time, basically over trade. England had done so well previously that they had taken much of France's trade with these native nations away from them. France wished to reestablish this. One, by building a string of forts to control the area, but also by reestablishing connections with their native allies. And we knew this at the time, that France was very good at working with native allies. England, not so much. So we had a slight advantage in which to maintain this advantage. Because of my position in the militia, I was given the responsibility to take a message from Williamsburg all the way to basically Lake Erie, to deliver to the French from Virginia, to tell them to leave the Ohio Valley because Virginia claims it, even though Pennsylvania claimed it at the time. We were right. And to leave. So my job was to just travel. So I took this letter and thought a great opportunity. I was commissioned a major in the militia at the time. And at the tender age of 21 years old, thought I knew everything. That's so very kind of you to say. I was absolutely wrong. I traveled to the frontier. I met alongside great military leaders, great political leaders of the native nations, Tanagrisan, Scarawade, Alakipa, and I had the opportunity to realize, well, I didn't realize it then, now I do, to not listen to any of their advice, because I knew what was best. So we took ourselves up, delivered the message. The French refused to leave the Ohio River Valley, surprising no one. But the second part of my responsibility was to see what their plan was. And it was very obvious, they made no show of hiding it, they were planning an invasion of the Ohio Valley. Hundreds of canoes, bateaus, troops, alliances with native nations, threatening various native nations to come and join them once again. And so I came back to Williamsburg, delivered my messages, and found out that the journal I had taken was then published in the newspaper. If I had known they were going to do that, I would have done a better job writing it. It was bad. The next year, in the spring, late winter, early spring, I was sent alongside a contingent of troops, into what became what we call the 1st Regiment of Virginia, the Virginia Regiment. Not militia, but actually established provincial soldiers paid from the colony of Virginia, to establish a fort at the forks of the Ohio. A small fort began being built. I hadn't gotten there yet. We were going to support it. The French got there before I did. The French threatened 30 or so odd men with their nearly 1,000 soldiers that if they didn't leave, it would not go well for them. The 30 or so odd men did not stand their ground against incredible odds. They left. And so this tension began. Our native allies had come to our position seeking assistance. Tanagrisan and Scarawade, both Seneca men, but both leading Shawnee and Mingo groups respectively. They had been met with this man named Michel Pepin dit Laforce earlier that year. The name doesn't matter that much. It was French. And he had threatened them that if they and their families did not join France, they would be killed within 30 days. As would their brothers, the English. That's not a very good thing. So we knew that this large French military force was trying to get to where I was to push us out of the frontier. I was waiting for reinforcements from New York and North Carolina, those independent companies I spoke of earlier. I was given orders to build a fortification at a different location to supply this new fort. That got blown up completely, not literally, but figuratively. So we fell back to a place called Great Meadows, and constructed a small fortification called Fort Necessity. The name should tell you everything you need to know about it. It was not Fort well planned out. It was Fort Necessity. It was a small stockadoed place to store powder that when we realized we couldn't do our objective, we fortified as a fallback position if necessary. I, in my youthful ignorance, thought that I could hold that place against 4 or 5 times my number. Hold that thought. The French were moving closer to us. I did not have reinforcements. We were still waiting. I was a lieutenant colonel at this time. Eventually, we heard news from our native allies that there were groups of French under this command of this other French officer, Pepin Laforce, who were looking for their families to catch them before they could get to our lines. So think of it this way. The French are here. I was there. And Laforce had gotten between the French and us, and our native allies were here trying to get to us. So they asked us, we found this man, Laforce, come and help us take him. I had unwritten orders to take him if possible. I referenced them in one of my letters to Governor Dinwiddie, which is sort of the opposite point of unwritten orders. You don't write about them in letters, but I was 22. I didn't know what I was doing. So we go. We come upon this French force, about 20 or so men, 30 or so. We set up a beautiful ambush around them. You can go see the place too. It's very close to Great Meadows just now, called Jumonville's Glen. I stepped forward. The French saw me. They hadn't even posted sentries. Tells you how well prepared they were. They saw me, leapt to their guns, and I thought, good enough. That's an attack, in my opinion, and gave the order for my men to begin the assault on the French position. Would you like to take a guess what the order was? I fired the first shot at them. I had my fusee with me. I saw them reach to their guns. I pulled the trigger and I fired, and the attack commenced. About 15 minutes of conflict. I don't know if we actually wounded or killed any Frenchmen ourselves. 2 of my men were wounded. 1 was killed. He was too far in front of our lines and got shot by his own friends. The French broke and ran directly into Tanagrisan and his 7 warriors who were waiting for them. And they did most of the work. The French then realized they were surrounded on 3 sides, couldn't escape the other direction, came back and surrendered to Scarawada, another man, another great war chief with me, who then said to Laforce, who was the only officer alive at the time, or functional at the time, no, don't surrender to me, surrender to Lieutenant Colonel Washington. He's the one in charge. Answer to him. So he comes and surrenders to me, whereupon Tanagrisan walks up to both of us, comes up to Laforce, and says to him, I don't remember the exact words, he was speaking in French, it was translated to me later. Effectively, you threatened my family and I, you called me a coward, and I'm going to show you that I am not. I went to go kill him right then and there. I stopped him. Shortly afterwards, all the wounded were killed. I don't know how. That's the story I'm sticking with. You can ask me later if you like. And that is the casus belli the French used to start the war officially almost 2 years later. They claimed we retreated, Fort Necessity occurred, the French counterattacked. We held out for 3 days, for multiple hours throughout the day. We eventually had to surrender. We could not retreat from our position. We had 2 choices. We either stayed at Fort Necessity and held our ground waiting for reinforcements, or we retreated to the frontier and were attacked on a road. We only had 300 men. The French had nearly 1,000. We knew that if we got attacked on the road by superior numbers, we would be decimated. So it was better to sit and wait and hope to hold out. We were able to hold out for about 12 hours until finally we had to surrender. We ran out of ammunition. Half of them were drunk. One of my officers acted like a coward and hid inside the entire day. The French, we found out later, had also run out of powder, which is why they kept asking us to surrender, because they couldn't shoot us anymore. And they didn't have enough men to take our position, so if we just waited, they would have left. Or they would have starved us out, so either way we were in a bad spot. So we surrendered. And in the surrender documents that I signed, and my commanding officer who was with me, who was a British officer, also signed. He was a captain, I was lieutenant colonel, but because he was a British officer, he actually technically outranked me. So he and I both signed this agreement, so it wasn't entirely my fault. And in that document we discovered about 4 months later, we'd admitted to assassinating a French ambassador. Oops. there's a whole other story there. If you would like to hear it, I will tell you some other time. You can come ask me about it. Couldn't read French. Very helpful. But that's what started the conflict. So I served for the rest of that year, resigned my commission, stepped away. The next year came, I repositioned myself to serve as a military aide to General Braddock. You all may have known General Braddock. The big march all the way through parts of Maryland and Pennsylvania and Virginia. His horrific conflict at Braddock's defeat in 1755, very close to at that time Fort Duquesne and now Fort Pitt, Pittsburgh. I was there. I was one of the few officers who got off the field without being injured. There were 83 officers and 69 of them were killed and wounded in the course of 3 hours. We had 1,200 men on the field, British troops in that conflict, and by the end of it, 1,000 of them were casualties. 450 dead, 550 wounded. 200 men got off without a single scratch on that conflict. It tells you something went horribly, horribly wrong. I was able to basically maintain my reputation through that conflict because I was, again, one of the people who was injured, and myself and a handful of other officers were able to get us off the field, including a very good friend of mine until about 2 years ago, then Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Gage, the general who was in command of Boston when the war started at Lexington and Concord in 1775. We're all here. We're all in the same circle. So that was Braddock's defeat. The next couple of years I served as the colonel of the Virginia Regiment in Virginia. I was responsible for all of Virginia's defense, militia, our actual official Virginia Regiment. I served under General Forbes in 1758, Forbes expedition where we took Fort Duquesne from the French finally. And when I say we took Fort Duquesne, I mean the French burned it and left before we got there. By that point, we were taking whatever we could get. And then as soon as that was over, I was done. I resigned my military commission. My health was horrific. I had taken severe illness. I was suffering with consumption and intermittent fever and bloody flux. And how much time do you have? And pleuritic pains all at the same time. I was deeply depressed. And so I resigned my commission, stepped away from conflict, was married shortly thereafter to a lady who, frankly, helped save me from the worst of the effects of those things. And have not served militarily from 1758 until 1775. Held no military commission, was not involved in the militia. It's illegal, but who's going to stop me? And effectively became a public servant, served Virginia as a House of Burgess member, where I learned politics. I was sitting alongside men who were all born to privilege. And when I say born to privilege, I mean
I thought it was going to be more.
privilege. Some, not a handful, for the most part, knew this, had been trained for this, had gone to university and colleges, had been bred since birth and trained since birth to be men of government. And here I am, a man from the 7 Years' War, a soldier, who has no military experience, has no political experience in training, who had simply been shot at for the better part of 4 years and managed to survive. Now sitting in government, because of my marriage and the death of my family, and because of my military experience, now people expected me to perform in a certain way. My expectations had changed. I was no longer George Washington of Ferry Farm outside Fredericksburg. I was now George Washington of Mount Vernon. I was a military man. Do you know who elected me to serve them politically? It wasn't my home constituency in Fairfax. Who? Winchester, Virginia. Why Winchester? Why Frederick County, Virginia? It's where I had been stationed for 4 years defending. And they had watched me and my soldiers and our native allies lose blood and men and friends for 3 years. And they were not always fond of me. One lady, in fact, early on in the conflict, to give you an idea of how things had changed from the beginning of the war to the end of the war, one lady was so incensed we had to requisition goods from the people because we didn't have any supply. Our government abandoned us effectively for almost 3 years. And we requisitioned supplies, and we're going to pay them back eventually when I had pay come through. And the lady, she threatened to blow my head off. 2 years later, her husband voted for me. What a turn of events. But that tells you a bit of my connection to the people and how my opinions began changing. I was born to privilege with high aspirations, very much believing that I was born to be a certain thing. But in the conflict, in the war, I learned an important lesson. Just because I was born to lead, ostensibly, did not mean I was going to be good at it. It mattered how I behaved in the position. My behavior matters more. Young people, if you learn nothing else today, learn this. Actions speak louder than words. What you say is meaningless. What you do is everything. Because if you say something and don't do it, does that make you a liar?
Yeah.
Yes. Easy answer. I'm so glad. I'm glad you said that. Because it's some folks. See, trained well. I like it.
She wandered off.
So this is the reality of the circumstance. This is the circumstance that pushed me into political office. I served the people imperfectly, but I had served them. And so they elected me to serve in the government position, and now I found myself in a position of more expectation. So I had to learn. So I listened. I said almost when I was voted in on my birthday in 59, excuse me. I sat there, and the governor, the Speaker of the House at the time, John Robinson, said, "We now would like to recognize Colonel George Washington, who has recently joined our illustrious government, the House of Burgesses, as a representative of Frederick County, a hero of the conflict, just recently returned from war,
She dressed up.
savior of Virginia in many capacities."
Dressed her up.
There were some rumbles about that. Not everyone liked me at the time.
Yeah.
In fact, a lot of people wished I had died a year earlier in the conversation. That was awkward. Would you say a few words? I stood up, choked on myself for 30 seconds, couldn't say two things together, and Robinson said, "That's good enough. Please sit down before you hurt yourself." That was my entry into the House of Burgesses.
There she is. All dressed up
I
in
was
the
27. So the next 15 years, I served. I listened, I learned, I supported. Any military men who needed assistance, I supported them. Any families that did, our native allies, I supported them as best I could in conflict. And then, I tried to forget the fact that the British had treated us poorly in the war. And I will leave very shortly on this subject. During the conflict, I learned that lesson of leadership, but I also saw something else. I saw British officers, not all, but most, look down upon provincial soldiers, men who had been in conflict since the beginning, men who had spent blood and tears and died, men of all walks of life, men who were born in privilege, men who were not, men who were free blacks, men who were natives, men who were Irishmen and Scotsmen, God help us all from the Scots, men who were Germans, men who were English, all of them together in conflict, women who had died in conflict defending their families, all these people serving for their families, for the cause, for England, to continue to take land for His Majesty. And British troops looked down upon us, treated us poorly, oftentimes sent them to die first, ignored them, refused to give positions of commission, and just all around treated colonists as second class. And I have been raised to believe that I was a British subject equal in all capacities with any other member of Great Britain, with no difference of where I was born. And what became readily apparent was, if you were not born in England, it didn't matter. This thing I spoke of earlier, that there are only two distinctions in the British Empire, there's those who are free and there are those who are not of the Empire, that apparently was no longer true. You were English, and then there were the other people. We found ourselves in that position. So by the end of the war, I realized I would never obtain Royal British Commission because I was not well positioned enough and I wasn't born on that soil. I tried multiple times to get commissions. I was refused every time, or offered a commission lower than that of which I currently held, so that of a colonel. I tried to get my entire regiment made regular British establishments, so 700 men would all be guaranteed pay for life in some capacity, and we were refused. The Virginia Regiment, which had fought from 1754 through the entire conflict. Let me ask you a quick question. Do you know how many British commissioned troops were stationed in Virginia during the 7 Years' War?
Not many.
Not many? Give me a number.
100, maybe.
Zero.
How many in Georgia?
0.
0. How many in Pennsylvania?
0.
Until 1755, none. And then there were about 1,000 in Philadelphia, and they stayed there nearly the entire continent. How about Massachusetts? None. Connecticut? None. Rhode Island?
None.
None. New York? A
None.
handful.
Oh.
Maryland?
None.
New Jersey?
None.
You see its pattern here.
Yep.
Until Braddock's expedition and then Forbes' expedition, there were no British troops stationed. In Virginia, we were left alone for 4 years, except for Braddock's expedition, to defend our own backcountry, where nearly 3,000 British troops sat in New York City. Our own governor, Lord Loudon, sent over here from Great Britain to lead the British forces in North America, was made the governor of Virginia so he would be better suited to serve, never even came to the colony of Virginia the 4 years he was here. He had the audacity to stare me in the face when I went and asked for him to bring my regiment into forces and said, "Who are you? We know nothing of you. Go back to Virginia and do your job." I handled that very well.
And by that you mean you stabbed him.
I did not. I wanted to, but I did not. I learned to control myself a little bit better by that point in time. So when I resigned my commission, it was with this expectation that my hopes of British commission and serving the king were dashed to pieces, and I must serve in another way. And it went well until the end of the conflict in 1763. Because in 1764 and 1765, it became apparent that it was not just the British Army that looked down upon Virginians. It was the British government in general. It passed a little thing called the stamp tax. That basically said, you're going to pay a tax. Not a big thing in and of itself. Taxation was never our problem. Taxes are necessary for a government to function. The problem was the way they levied it.
Yeah, you can see the heat.
And I did not like it very much. And that will lead us to the American Revolution. So if you are here this afternoon and would like to hear the rest of that story, at 2:15, come back and talk to me more. In the interim, I have a few minutes left before my time is officially over. And so if you have any questions or curiosities you would like to answer, ask, go ahead. I will be here all afternoon. So what questions do you have? Any brief ones? Any deep curiosities, deep fear? Yes, ma'am.
When you were stationed in Winchester, how far up and down that valley did you travel?
How far up and down the valley of Winchester did I go? So we covered, I went all the way down to Augusta County, towards where modern day Gainesville is, all the way up to almost Uniontown, Pennsylvania. Back and forth. We had 300 miles to cover with about 275 men.
Can I ask you about your dad?
Yes.
Was it a bloodletting that caused death?
This is awkward. Yes, the question is how do I die? So the best way I can describe this is would bloodletting kill me? Not really, no. So the actual death itself in 1799, hypothetically, if I were to die, it would be 1799. It's a good year. I got a cold, throat infection specifically, and before the bloodletting began, I was asphyxiated. So the bloodletting was being done to remove inflammation from the point of intention, hoping that it would open up my air passages. The alternative was to cut the esophagus open, or I'm not a doctor. The windpipe, the trachea. Thank you. Have an insert a straw to help breathe. The problem is infection is so common it would have killed me probably anyway. The bleeding was being done with the intention of helping to remove inflammation. The problem is at the time we did not understand that you do not replenish your platelets every night. The blood will replenish itself very quickly, but the binding agent that stops wounds does not. So I was not able to fight the infection. So it weakened me, but based on the actual illness itself, I was probably going to die regardless. So it did not help. It may have hastened it somewhat, but more than likely it was not the cause of the death itself. I've been unhealthy for a year. I survived in 1797, I think it was. I had a cancerous carbuncle cut out of my thigh, with a cutaneous form of anthrax with me. I was in poor health. I was 67 years old. I had been through a little bit for a few years, and so it was not. I'd already thought that I was going to die pretty soon.
Story right, you carried.
Hand back here, then we'll come this direction. Yes, sir.
During the Chechen Indian War,
Yes.
did you ever hear the story that Native American leader told that you were shot many times?
Yes.
And he observed that God must have saved you for great.
Yeah, it was his name's Guy Afuda. As a Shawnee man, Seneca actually living with a Shawnee, if I'm not mistaken. I met with him in 1771 outside Pittsburgh with one of his hunting camps out there doing some surveying work. And he related that he had been at Braddock's defeat. And it said, oh, I was involved in conflict, we tried to kill you multiple times. It was very common. So no, I'm well aware of it. I had 4 bullet holes in my clothes, 1 through my hat, 2 horse shots, 1 raped, 3 wounded, 1 killed, 1 mortally wounded, the other 1 injured. And it was, but also it's a very common, people oftentimes make a large deal out of this. It's actually much more common than you might think. It's very common when 2 warriors opposed to each other get together, they talk about how hard the other person was to kill. Because it shows honor to that individual. So my friend Dr. Craig, I think, took a great deal more from it than I did. But he's Scottish, so it's fine. But yes, I'm well aware of it. You had an answer, yes.
How would you characterize your relationship with both General Braddock and General Forbes?
Yes, with both Forbes and Braddock. Braddock, I think, the best way I can describe my relationship with General Braddock is, his friendships were strong, his enmities were stronger, both his vices and virtues on equal display at all times and all circumstances. Does that tell you something about General Braddock? He and I got along fairly well, but we had many tensions. Oftentimes we argued over the validity of colonial troops versus British troops, but I respected him highly. Unlike many people who blamed him for the defeat, I was never one of them. He did the best he could in the circumstances. Many accusations were levied against him that have been known through history to this point. They were all made by men who did not behave the way they should have at the time, and used it to save their own reputations at the expense of a dead man who could not defend himself. All of his aides, including myself, were incredible advocates of General Braddock afterwards, and all of his second and third in command were the ones who were dragging his name through the mud. One of them was not even at the conflict itself. Dunbar. Damn his eyes. But that is the reality of that circumstance. Forbes, much more of a tense relationship. He thought the Virginians were very valuable, unlike Braddock, the same way, but he did not like some of what he thought to be my political positioning at the time. Yes.
How did you get French aid in the Revolution?
How would I get French aid in the Revolution? We'd have to win at the right time, at the right place, and we would have to have a government in place to get that aid, otherwise they would never help us. So the Articles of Confederation and our victory at Saratoga were the reason that pulled the French in.
Oh.
Officially. There was a hand back here, then a hand here. Yes, we'll go here, then we'll go there. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
For the people who ride in the horses and war, did any of the horses die?
Quite often. Yes, they did. There's a hand in the back, I believe. Do I remember correctly? Was there one? Did that hand go away? No? Good? Excellent. Well, I will stand out here for a while. If you have questions, come up, talk to me. I am a person like anyone else, and I will hopefully see some of you later on this afternoon. Enjoy yourself, friends.